Hi, everyone. Welcome to Pagan Happy Hour and happy Friday. We made it through the week, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. We have a very fun show planned. Today, we are going to be talking about how Halloween was celebrated during Victorian times. And I've unearthed a few love spells from this time period as well that I will be sharing with you. So we're going to dig into all of that fun history. But before we get into it, if you are new here, welcome. I do Pagan Happy Hour every Friday at 5 p.m. Central or 6 p.m. Eastern. This is something I've been doing for, I think, probably the past 6 months or so, and it's been so wonderful. I love doing this show, and it's so great to check in and chat with you guys every week. Now, Pagan Happy Hour is meant to be kind of a conversation, so I'm going to be looking over here at my comments as we're going along. I'm going to be bringing in your thoughts and your ideas into the conversation as well. And there are a couple ways you can support the show if you would like. The best way is through my Patreon, which I have linked down below. If you choose to become a patron, you gain access to my exclusive Discord server where you can chat with and share resources with fellow pagans and witches. And I also actually have a Kickstarter campaign that I launched a couple weeks ago. I'm very excited about it. It's for my tarot deck, the Key Tarot. So if you are interested in tarot, curious about tarot, I highly recommend opening up a new tab and clicking that link down in my description box to learn a bit about what I've been working on in the tarot realm. And lastly, another great way you can support the show is through Super Chats, which is the $ button at the bottom of the chat box area. And you can donate any amount and your question or comment will pop up really big for me. So I'll be sure to bring your thoughts and your questions into the conversation. Now that we got that out of the way, I would love to hear from you in the comments where you are watching from and what you are drinking today. So let me cue that drink music and let's jump into it. So I am just having a simple Pilsner today, very Oktoberfest. Let's see, I see people chiming in from Seattle, from Texas, from DC, from Indiana, from Mexico, from West Virginia, Pennsylvania, England, Denmark, South Carolina, North Carolina, Missouri, Colorado, Long Island, Sacramento, Maryland, Michigan, Saskatchewan, Sweden, Florida, Austin, Ohio, Southern Canada, and Kentucky. And I see some of you guys commenting on my hair. Thank you very much. I just got it done today. Feeling very blonde right now. And I'm dressed very autumnal. Let me show you my new dress. So I got my new autumn dress on, so I am ready for the Samhain season, I guess you could say. And I hope you guys are too, because it is really only a week away. So of course, next Pagan Happy Hour will be the huge Samhain episode, so stay tuned for that. But for today, we are going to be diving into Halloween during the Victorian era, because each time period has had a very interesting way of celebrating this ancient holiday, and that's what we're going to dig into today. So let me have another sip of my beer, turn off the wine music, and we'll get started. Okay. So today we are talking about the Victorians. Now, if you're unfamiliar, this time period, I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. It's from 1837 to 1901. And it was, of course, the reign of Queen Victoria. And she had a huge influence on how Halloween was celebrated, especially, obviously, in Britain. So we're going to be getting into that. And I see we have our first super chat from Ross. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. That says, hello from Scotland, and that you say that you're really excited about this live. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Ross. And it's really cool that you're from Scotland, because we'll be talking a bit about Queen Victoria and her extremely lavish Halloween celebrations that occurred in Scotland at her castle there. But before we get into it, let's discuss some of the major differences between how the Victorians celebrated Halloween versus how we celebrate it today. Now, today, especially in America, Halloween is really kind of a kid-centric holiday, I would say. It's a lot about the trick-or-treating and dressing up in costumes, going door to door. So it's very kid-centric. And it wasn't always the case. Obviously, we know about Samhain if we're going all the way back. That was not a kid-centric holiday at all. The ancient Celtic festival of Samhain was very much for the adults and for kind of honoring the fae, the spirits of the land, and protecting the livestock for the upcoming year. And of course, we'll be talking all about Samhain traditions next week. But in the Victorian era, it wasn't about kids either. In fact, it was oddly a romantic holiday. It was considered a holiday for young, unmarried couples for the most part, or a holiday to perhaps meet a soulmate or something like that. So a lot of the Victorian traditions we'll be discussing today are in the realm of romance, which is why I was able to find so many love spells from this time period. So that's one of the huge differences between modern day Halloween as well as ancient Samhain practices. So now, there were many different forms of entertainment during Halloween for the Victorians, and they were really fond of parlor games, any type of activity that kind of brought people together. And they were also really into seances. The Victorians were fascinated by death and by ghosts. Obviously, during that time period, a lot of people died of disease and like tuberculosis and things like that. So death was on everyone's mind. So things like seances or spirit boards were a very popular activity during Victorian times. And to be fair, things like that are still kind of popular during Halloween today. Now, as to these specific parlor games, these were often about trying to figure out the identity of your future spouse. So they were this kind of combination of divination slash spells. So it's kind of tricky to parse out the difference between those two in this circumstance, but they would be doing these little kind of spell-like activities to try and figure out who their soulmate was and to find out some information about them. Now, where these spells and divinatory games came from is kind of interesting too. Usually it was in the local newspapers or in women's magazines. So kind of like the Victorian era version of Cosmo or something like that, where, 10 different spells to find your future mate and things like that. So oddly enough, this type of activity wasn't something that the church was super concerned about, especially in America. People really weren't that weirded out about these little divinatory parlor games, as you might think, considering, of course, they were very religious during the Victorian era. But for some reason, this divination spell stuff to find your future mate didn't really draw the ire of the Christians in the community. So I do think that is a little bit interesting. And let me check your comments here before moving on to the next part. So let's see. Okay, awesome. Let's see. Rachel says, the Victorians were morbid and I'm here for it. Yes, me too. I love how spooky and weird the Victorian era is. Rachel is also asking, were they the ones that took dead infant pictures? Yes. In the Victorian era, people did take pictures of deceased family members. So yeah, you can find those. They're very creepy. Also, it was common to have like lockets or picture frames containing the deceased's hair. So you cut off a locket of their hair and carry it with you. kind of macabre. Let me see here. Awesome. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. And of course, if you have any other little tidbits that you want to share about the Victorian era, feel free to put them in the comments and I'll try and spot them and bring them into the conversation as well. And then Abigail in the comments is saying, supposedly the Victorians thought it was fashionable to look pale and deathly. More of the obsession with death. Yes, that is true as well. So we talked a bit about kind of those main differences between Victorian Halloween and modern Halloween. So next, let's talk a little bit about the decorations. If you were in the Victorian era and you were hosting your own Halloween bash, how would you decorate? Now, there are some similarities here. Victorian hostesses would decorate their home with kind of autumnal wreaths and leaves and things that they collected. In a lot of ways, many pagans are still doing that, so that's very similar. They would also hang apples and horseshoes for luck from the doorways. So that's kind of a neat tradition you can incorporate if you are interested. Let's see. Oh, and we have another super chat here with another fun Victorian fact. Craig is mentioning about the Victorian funerals that they had in the home of the family. So yeah, the traditional wake concept where the dead was placed in the home for a couple days, which is kind of disturbing. But yeah, that was something that was done there. They got really comfortable with death in the Victorian era. Now, the Victorians also like to decorate with some of the classic Halloween symbols that we're, definitely familiar with, such as black cats or bats or witches or ghosts and devils. So they would decorate with pictures or cutouts of those types of things as well. Now, they definitely decorated with lots of candles, so that's pretty similar to what we do today. And they also did do jack-o'-lanterns, but their jack-o'-lantern was a little bit different. Pumpkins, which I have here, are mostly native to America. So in Europe, they would primarily cut jack-o'-lanterns out of turnips, which if you Google image search turnip jack-o'-lanterns, you can find some pretty disturbing looking ones. They look really freaky. And then on top of that, a neat kind of fact about the jack-o'-lanterns is that they were named after this kind of Irish trickster figure named Jack. And Jack was, I believe he was like cursed to exist between heaven and hell as this kind of wandering spirit. So people would light their jack-o'-lanterns to either kind of help him find his way to home, perhaps, or maybe to kind of just scare him away. There's some conflicting information there. But in general, jack-o'-lanterns have a pretty long history, and I've gone over jack-o'-lanterns in more detail in some of my Samhain videos I've done in previous years, and I've linked a lot of those videos down below in my description box, as well as I've linked a few sources of some of the material that I'm talking about today, if you're interested in doing some of your own research. Let's see. Oh, it's getting hot here in my flannel dress. So now jack-o'-lanterns were also used as kind of like a party invite. They were very formal in the Victorian era. So when you wanted to invite someone to a party, what they would do for Halloween is they would have a little card, usually with kind of a cutesy, spooky Halloween rhyme, inviting the person, and then they would leave it on the doorstep on top of the jack-o'-lantern. So they kind of give them a little jack-o'-lantern with their little party invite, which I think is a super cute idea if you were doing your own Halloween party nowadays, to give like actual invites as little mini jack-o'-lanterns. And of course, costumes were also pretty big for Halloween parties during the Victorian era. So that is something that is very much still true today. Now, they didn't quite go out and buy brand new costumes for their party. More so, they kind of remixed their current clothes to connect it to one of the classic Halloween type figures. So there's some great imagery you can find on Google of like a Victorian bat costume, which is just a modified black Victorian dress with some kind of fabric to mimic the bat wings. Or you'll even find like Queen of Hearts type costumes that are just kind of like they add little details to their current dress to kind of bring in that costume vibe. They would also wear a lot of hats that worked with their costume idea. So it's a really neat trend. And I love the idea of instead of going out and buying a costume, using what you already have and remixing it a bit. I really like that. It's a good way to be sustainable as well. We have a super chat here from Amy. Thank you so much, Amy, that says, thank you so much for all the research you put into your videos. It's so refreshing. Thank you so much, Amy. I'm so glad you enjoy my videos. Let me check your comments here and have another sip of my beer before moving on to the next section. Let's see. Peach in the comments has a great comment. She's saying, I bet they had a lot of Egyptian revival costumes. Great point, and I bet they did because Egypt was very popular during the Victorian era, and they would even have mummy unwrapping parties there, which sounds very disturbing, but they would literally buy a mummy from Egypt, cart it all the way to Britain, and then host a dinner party and unwrap it in front of the guests, and the women would faint and swoon, and it's like this whole thing. But it's kind of neat because mummies were usually wrapped with various amulets. So as you were unwrapping the mummy, you would actually find really neat little talismans and amulets and jewelry, but very disturbing, definitely. Let's see. Oh my goodness. So many good comments, guys. Okay. Let's see. Now, next, let's talk a bit about the food during the Victorian Halloween celebration. Now, some of it's a bit similar. Obviously, they didn't really do the whole like chocolate candy that we do in modern day times. They did eat a lot of nuts and a lot of apples. And they actually had a form of apple that is quite a bit similar to our candy apple. They would put an apple on a wooden stick and coat it in a sugar water glaze. And then they would take that stick and take it out to the bonfire and kind of roast the apple over the bonfire. So it's kind of this weird mix of s'mores and candy apples, but it sounds delicious. So if you're looking for a Victorian activity to try, I recommend doing that one. And it's great too that they were going out to the bonfire because, as we'll talk about next week during Samhain's Pagan Happy Hour, the bonfire is really the quintessential centerpiece of a traditional Samhain festivity. So while most Victorian parties occurred in the home, it's kind of neat that some people were still out celebrating by the bonfire. That's very pagan. Let's see. And another thing too that they would eat this type of cake called Halloween cake. Now, only the unmarried people would eat this cake, and hidden within it were 3 different items. So you had a ring, a coin, and a button. And there are variations a bit on the items hidden within the cake, but these are the 3 main ones. And when you were eating your cake, what symbol you got told you a bit about your future. It's a bit similar to, makes me think a little bit of King's cakes. that people eat in Louisiana for Mardi Gras, where like if you find the baby in your piece of cake, you have to buy the king's cake for the next party. But this one for Halloween cake during the Victorian era, what you got what you got kind of predicted your marital future. So if you got the ring in your piece of cake, that meant that you were about to get married soon. If you got the coin, it indicated you would end up rich. But if you got the button, it meant you were to be a spinster. So you probably don't want to get the button in the Victorian era. But it's such a kind of funny thing that they did, and also a huge choking hazard. Can you imagine? Just eating your little Halloween cake and then all of a sudden you're choking on a coin or a button. um, but it's kind of a cute little tradition they did, and kind of a minor divinatory practice if you think about it as well. So next we're going to dive into Queen Victoria specifically, because she had a huge influence here on how Halloween was celebrated. But before we get to that, let me check your comments again. Okay, I see some interesting facts you guys are bringing to the conversation. Let's see, in the comments, the G-Man talks about soul cakes that were very traditional this time of year. The story behind soul cakes is pretty interesting. Yeah, so soul cakes was a type of cake that you would bake and then you would go souling. Going souling is kind of like going caroling, where you would go door to door and distribute these cakes. And soul cakes, as far as I know, are a bit more traditional, closer to Yule time than Samhain, but it's definitely something that people were thinking about doing and has a really fascinating history. I do want to look into soul cakes more in a future video. Let's see. I see someone asking why the button indicated someone would be single. I think it has to do with, gosh, could it actually have to do with the term spinster as the one that spins the wool? If it's a button, it has a sewing metaphor, and you think of the crone as the woman who sits at home and spins on the spinning wheel, kind of very witchy. So maybe it's going with that, but I think just you're going to be sewing clothes. You're not really going to be focused on, getting married or anything like that. So not quite sure exactly why the button indicated that you weren't going to be married, but maybe it has something to do with that whole spinster idea. Let's see. And then Jerry in the comments is mentioning that Victorians did a lot of seances. Yes, they did. And spiritualism was very popular. People really did think that the veil was thin and that they would be able to communicate with their deceased loved ones. So seances were a pretty common thing during the Victorian era, which is pretty neat. Let's see. Ooh, Frida in the comments has an interesting note about jack-o'-lanterns. She says in Sweden, they used to decorate jack-o'-lanterns and use them to put on their ancestors' graves. And if you couldn't get to the grave, they would light a candle in the garden or house. So using the jack-o'-lanterns as a way of ancestor veneration, that's pretty cool. Let's see. Awesome. Okay, great comments. Let's see. Okay. Next, let's talk a little bit about Queen Victoria, who was, of course, the trendsetter of the Victorian age. She is probably one of the most beloved British rulers. We have the current Queen Elizabeth, and we have Queen Victoria as two of the longest reigning queens. They reigned for a very long time and have had a really strong influence on the culture. Now, Queen Victoria was known for her lavish parties and festivities, and especially her Halloween party. Now, she threw this very elaborate Halloween party, not in England, but at her castle in Scotland. Now, Scotland was still a bit more witchy and less under the hold of the church than England was. So, some of these ancient Halloween or Samhain traditions were still kind of going on over there, which is pretty neat. But what she did is she would ride in this great procession. So she would be in her fancy carriage and they would go down to a bonfire. And behind her would be all of these figures, these men and women holding torches. And they would all head to the great bonfire. Now, they carried with them a particular effigy. This was a effigy in the shape of a witch, also called a shandy dan. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Correct me if I'm wrong. But this particular witch effigy was carried at the front of their parade by a man dressed as a hobgoblin. So you can already imagine the visuals here and how ridiculous and amazing this party would have been. So they carry this witch effigy to the bonfire with Queen Victoria and all of these people holding torches, and then they toss the witch into the bonfire as kind of a way of perhaps eliminating their sins for the year. But this practice evolved and changed over time. And it started to become kind of this silly mock trial they would do, where they would have the witch effigy and then they'd have the judge and they would accuse the witch and of all these horrible things. And then they try the witch, and of course, she was found guilty. And then they would toss the witch into the fire. So, kind of dark and dramatic, but also kind of like fun and silly. So it does kind of sound like a great party, I guess. And I'm sure there was much drinking to be had as well, you can imagine. Let's see, in the comments, Edward Tone is mentioning the witch scene in Monty Python. Exactly, it totally makes me think of that, where they do the witch trial. It's so funny. Um, let's see. Now, one neat thing I learned about Charles Dickens while doing the research for this is that Charles Dickens was already a popular author and he was living in England. So he had already written several successful books. And in England, while they did do some of these Victorian Halloween parties, they were much more lighthearted and fun. Well, Charles Dickens went to America. And he went to America during Halloween time. And he got to experience how the Americans in the Victorian era were celebrating Halloween and discovered they were much more into the spooky side of Halloween. There was a lot more ghost stories, seances, a lot of spooky stuff going on in the American version of Halloween that was a bit different than how it was usually celebrated in England. So, this visit to America had a pretty significant impact on him. Now, he goes back to England and he immediately writes The Christmas Carol. Now, of course, The Christmas Carol is Dickens' maybe most famous work. And The Christmas Carol contains ghosts, in fact, three ghosts. And a lot of people postulate that his trip to America and his experience of an American style Halloween and all of its spookiness helped contribute to why he made Christmas Carol full of ghosts and magic. So I just think that's kind of a interesting factoid if any of you are Dickens fans. I definitely am. I actually read The Christmas Carol every year, and I find that there is a lot of pagan stuff going on in The Christmas Carol, especially the ghost of Christmas present to me really seems like a variation of the Green Man. So a lot of kind of fun stuff there. But I wanted to share that factoid because I just found it so interesting and maybe shows how American Halloween has always been a bit darker, perhaps, than the British version. So next, I promised you there would be spells, and I have unearthed several spells from the Victorian era that I'm going to share with you. And I do have links for where I found these down below if you'd like to look those up in the description box. But I have 4 examples here of Victorian love spells / divination activities in case you'd want to try. Now, all of these probably aren't going to be for everyone because, like we talked about, Victorian Halloween was very much about finding your romantic partner. So if you're single, these might be worth a try, but if you're already together with someone, maybe not. But the first one is called the rose test. Now, this particular type of spell or divination, I guess, it required a young lady to twine the stems of 2 roses, one representing herself and one representing her lover or whoever she was seeing at the time. And she would recite the following verse while intertwining these 2 rose stems. She would say, "Twine, twine, and intertwine. Let my love be wholly thine. If his heart be kind and true, deeper grow his rose's hue." Now, she would be looking at the rose while she recited this 3 times. And if her lover truly loved her, it would turn the rose a deeper shade of red. So she would be looking at the color of the rose petals to see if they become a deeper red. So I think that's just a very kind of sweet and cute little romantic spell that you could try if you're interested. And next we have the "Where is my love" spell. Now for this one, you would go outdoors, you'd pluck a strand of your hair, and then let it go in the wind. The direction in which the strand blows indicates the direction in which the future husband or wife lives. Now, while doing this, while letting go of the hair and watching the direction it flies, you would say the following: "I pluck this lock of hair off my head to tell whence comes the one I shall wed. Fly, silken hair, fly all the world around until you reach the spot where my true love is found." So a really cute rhyme there. And then we have 2 more. Let me see. Okay. 2 more little spells. Next is the looking glass spell. So you walk backwards in the moonlight while gazing at a mirror. So you're looking backwards and holding the mirror, and then you repeat the following lines: "Round and round, O stars so fair, ye travel and search out everywhere. I pray you, sweet stars, now show to me this night who my future husband will be." Now, if you've done it correctly, you should see the face of your future husband or wife in the mirror that you're holding. And then the last one is the tea time spell. So for this, the woman would take a teacup and suspend an empty spoon on the edge of the teacup. Then they would slowly pour honey into the part of the spoon, 1 drop at a time. Now, for each drop that went into the spoon, that would count as 1 year. So when the spoon eventually falls into the cup, you stop counting. So this was really a way to determine how many years until you get married. So you definitely don't want to squeeze the honey all at once because that would be like 20, 30 years. But you do it drop by drop. So those are 4 little spells that were done during the Victorian era to help you find your true love. Now, of course, there are plenty of them, and you can look them up. In fact, you can go to archives of some of these women's magazines and local newspapers to find the originals, which is so neat. These types of things were meant to be fun and silly and kind of like a parlor game. So I'm not sure how serious people actually took these spells and aspects of divination, but you can almost imagine how fun it would be, especially thinking back to when I was a young girl and I'd have sleepover parties and we would play these silly games trying to figure out who we would marry. And so nothing's really changed in that regard. People are still doing that. I remember the one that I would always do growing up was called MASH. Did you guys do that one too, where it's like mansion, apartment, shack, house, and then you do like a bunch of other ones to determine where you live, who you'll marry, how wealthy they'll be? I don't remember the full details, but things like that were something that I did when I was younger. And the classic fortune teller that you would make and then use your thumbs with the different colors and numbers. So this idea of people getting together, playing these silly games to determine information about their future spouse is something that's been done for quite a while, and it was something that was hugely popular during the Victorian era. So let me check your comments here. I'm curious to hear what you guys think of these little spells. Let's see. I see several of you guys commenting MASH, so you guys remember too. It wasn't just me doing that. I forget all the rules, but I did that at many a sleepover when I was younger. Let me see. It's so fun, these little things that just kind of connect you to the past in a way when you realize how young girls in the Victorian era were so similar to young girls today. We're still doing the same silly stuff when we get together during Halloween. Um, oh my goodness. Great comments and questions. Ooh, a really interesting comment here about the kind of American pagan influences with Halloween. So Leah in the comments is mentioning that the original American colonists were basically made up of displaced English peasants. And they kind of brought their country pagan practices with them, which is why a lot of Appalachian folk magic is similar to Moorish folk practices. That's really interesting. So Appalachian folk magic is something that is really neat. It's kind of a branch of magic that, unfortunately, due to time, has started to phase out a little bit. It's harder to find information about these old practices that were done in the mountains. But yes, I mean, when you think about the fact that the Appalachian area was mostly settled, I believe, by the Scots. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But they were the country folk, right? So they would have, of course, probably still been celebrating some of these ancient pagan practices, and they brought that with them to America when they immigrated. Let's see. So that's a great comment, and thank you for bringing that perspective there. Oh, and I see in the comments, Genghis Galahad is mentioning Sleepy Hollow, an American classic, and that is spooky, right? So when you think about the American version of Halloween, we really love the spooky aspect of this holiday a lot more than other people. And I think part of that might be that the early Americas were very scary to the European colonists who arrived, right? The woods were terrifying and full of fear. So they developed a lot of fascinating ghost stories and magic stories and demon stories as part of that. I love the movie Witch that came out a few years ago, if you've seen that. And I think that movie does a great job of showcasing the fear that a lot of early American settlers had. That's such a great movie. I love it so much. I always thought if I ever have, land someday or a little homestead, I definitely have to get a goat and name it Black Phillip after that movie. But yeah, let's see. Next, I'd love to hear your thoughts or questions here now that we've gone over quite a bit of how Halloween was celebrated during Victorian times. So, I'm going to be looking at your questions and comments. If you do have a question, it can be about the Victorian era or it could just be about Samhain or anything pagan related. Let me know in the comments, and I'd be happy to answer your questions. And one of the things I've been working on or thinking about lately is I do want to start investing a lot more effort into my YouTube channel and to start creating a lot more standalone regular videos, as well as, of course, continuing my pagan happy hour every Friday. So I've already started to plan some Yule themed content that I'm really excited about. I will probably be doing some videos upcoming for Yule about Frau Perchta, who is a German Yule witch, piece of folklore. I'll be doing some content about Krampus, also a German tradition, and a lot of just fun stuff. I have a lot of great things planned, and I really want to focus in on my YouTube channel and start creating some more educational content for you all. So, in order to do that, I need to kind of put aside some of the other stuff that I've been working on. So, I am not a full time YouTuber, in case you were wondering. I do a lot of other stuff. Primarily, I do business coaching work where I build websites and do social media marketing for a lot of other kind of esoteric and spiritual influencers. So I spend some time doing that. And of course, I'm a tarot reader and a tarot teacher. So I spend a lot of time doing that, as well as selling my deck. So I have a lot on my plate right now. But as soon as the Kickstarter is over for my tarot deck, which again, I highly recommend checking out, I really want to reinvest my time here on the YouTube channel and creating a lot of great pagan content for you all. So it's something I'm really excited about. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on topics of videos you would like me to research and create a video on. So do feel free to reach out with any ideas. And of course, for my patrons that might be watching, I love to hear your thoughts on video ideas that you are interested in seeing. So please do reach out anytime for those. For example, here I see a great comment from Exploring with Lauren that says, "I love a video about different origins of paganism and witchcraft from different parts of the world. Sometimes you mention places and types of craft that I don't even know of." Yes, I mean, when you think about it, paganism has existed all over the world, right? All cultures were pagan at one time, right? Before monotheism took over. So there's so much there to explore that would be fascinating to share with you guys. Oh, and we have a super chat from Rachel. Thank you so much. She says, "I first started researching paganism this year and have been going through your content for the last several months, and that she would love more content." Yes, I'm hoping to be able to invest more into the YouTube channel. And of course, the best way, if you are interested in supporting that work, joining my Patreon is probably a great way to do that. That way I can start maybe slowly shifting towards considering being a full-time YouTuber. That's a really big shift, and I probably won't do that till I reach like 100,000 subscribers or something like that. So if you're watching now and you're not subscribed and want me to make more content, you should probably subscribe so I can do that. Great question here from Jerry in the comments, asking, did the Victorians do trick or treat or have a Samhain night tradition? Well, I don't think they did trick or treat really. They mostly just had these Halloween parties with their friends. Now, in terms of the Samhain night traditions, not so much. They did sometimes have a bonfire, which is very much a Samhain tradition. And they were kind of communicating with ghosts of their ancestors, which is also kind of a Samhain tradition, but definitely not as similar to the traditional Celtic version of Samhain. If you're interested in really kind of figuring out how Samhain was celebrated among the ancient Celts, I recommend checking the video out, linked below in my description box. I would recommend checking out the Wicca versus Celtic paganism, how Samhain was celebrated video. That kind of dives into that even more. Let me check your other comments and questions here. Oh, Peach has a video recommendation saying she would like to learn about early Masonic influences on our culture. Now, that's an interesting one, and I would love to research that as well. I keep on trying to convince my husband to join the Masons just so I can learn all their secrets and tell them to you, which would be horrible. I probably would get in a lot of trouble. I just want to know all the secrets. Let's see. Beetle Owl is requesting a video on the Greek god Pan. Yes, a super fascinating deity that I would like to make a video on in the future. Let's see. Beetle Owl also says the English have bonfires for every holiday. Yes, if you're thinking about one thing to do for any pagan holiday that's historically accurate, having a bonfire is it. Pretty much all of the traditional pagan holidays, at least the ones from Northern Europe, involved bonfires. That was really the center of the ritual and the experience for, I think, almost all of the pagan holidays. So that is always a great way to celebrate. Now, many of us, unfortunately, don't live in a place where we can have a bonfire. Now, I'm in an apartment complex, so I can't have a bonfire, but there is a fire pit in my apartment complex. So I like to covertly go out there sometimes, maybe do a little ritual or a little spell. But yeah, let's see. Rachel has an interesting comment. She's mentioning that pagan death rituals would be an interesting topic to cover. That would be really neat. I'm especially thinking of like the Vikings. They had really neat death rituals. Okay. Crow Goblin is mentioning, I thought only the cross-quarter holidays were fire festivals. I'm pretty sure they had fire as a component of pretty much all pagan festivals, though correct me if I'm wrong there. Let's see. Amanda is mentioning that she would like to see a video about being a beginner pagan and how to navigate paganism and things like that. So yeah, I do have several videos already for beginner paganism that you can check out, but I could definitely dig into that a bit in the future as well. And then Genghis Galahad is mentioning about the bonfire, the origins of the word being a combination of the words bone and fire. Yes, that is true, I believed, which makes it even spookier and more interesting. Let's see. Awesome. Let me just take another sip here. So one last thing I wanted to ask you guys as well. As I'm considering investing more of my time here in YouTube for the future, I'm thinking that might mean spending less time on social media. Right now, I run an Instagram account and I do a lot of live stuff on the Instagram, a lot of posts and things like that. So I am actually considering quitting social media and just having my YouTube channel so I could focus in on that and really work on creating content here. I'm a bit afraid of it, honestly. I worked really hard to build my Instagram and I just don't know if I want to be part of the whole Facebook thing anymore. Even though Instagram's a bit different than Facebook, it's still pretty much Facebook. So do you think I should do that? Do you think I should just delete all my social media and just focus on YouTube? Or is that too much of a risk? I'm going so much back and forth there. I know it's just bad for mental health. It's distracting. And I know if I really want to dig in, do the research, create a lot more videos, I'm going to have to focus in. And in order to do that, I might need to delete my Instagram. I don't know. I'm thinking about it. Yeah, it's tricky. I probably won't do that if I do choose to until at least my Kickstarter is done, since I'm doing a lot of work for that. But thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. Kind of scary, but might be the best thing really in terms of the YouTube channel. So So again, for next week, we will be celebrating Samhain together. So be sure to bring all of your Samhain questions with you for next week. It should be fun. We're going to dig into all the different historic Samhain traditions. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, I think that's it for today. Of course, if you have any questions for me, do please feel free to reach out. I have linked below my website where you can access my email. I have linked below my Kickstarter, a bunch of other Samhain and autumnal videos if you'd like to learn more about how pagans celebrated this season. And thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope you had a good time and we learned something together and it was really fun. And I will see you next Friday. Bye, guys.